security sector. The Standing Committee on National Security, Defense, and Foreign Affairs engaged the National Police Service on matters of security and standard operating procedure for handling demonstration. C, fighting corruption. The Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs, and Human Rights engaged the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission on matters corruption and action to be taken to scale up efforts to deal with corruption, especially in county governments. D, Mr. Speaker, this is our core mandate, especially in the county, so the committee involved, we must deal with this governor with precision, Mr. Speaker. D, equal opportunities for all Kenyans. The Standing Committee on National Cohesion, Equal Opportunity, and Regional Integration engages the Public Service Commission and the National Cohesion and Integration Commission to audit the state of employment in public service, including county government, and propose strategies to adhere to meritocracy, equality, and equity of opportunities across public service as imposed in Article 232 of Constitution on Values and Principles of Public Service. E, effective public participation and stakeholder engagement. The Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs, and Human Rights, 1, put in place mechanism to ensure that broader concerns for citizens, especially the youth, are received, considered, and taken into consideration in making decisions on public affairs. And 2, put in place mechanism that integrate new media as a medium for public participation in legislative process. F, health sector reforms. The Standing Committee on Health, 2, 1, expedite and facilitate public participation in the reenactment of Social Health Insurance Act, the Digital Health Act, and the Primary Health Act in compliance with the judgment of High Court petition number E 473 of 2023, and 2, engage with the Cabinet Secretary of Health and the Council of Governors with a view to standardize human resource policy for health workers across all counties. Education sector reforms. The Standing Committee on Education to liaise with the Ministry of Education and other stakeholders with a view to resolving the concerns raised regarding junior secondary school, JSS education, the new funding model for university education, and the acceptability of competence-based curriculum, CBC, and report their findings and recommendations to the Senate within 30 days. Mr. Speaker, I want to confirm to you, Mr. Speaker, that this Senate have listened to the GENZs, have listened to the millennial, they have listened even to Alpha, Mr. Speaker. And with our recommendation, Mr. Speaker, I want to confirm to you, Mr. Speaker, that right now, with all these raft of recommendation from the Senate of Republic of Kenya, which is the upper house, Mr. Speaker, we have listened to Kenyans. And I don't have doubt in my mind, Mr. Speaker, with all our recommendation that this country will be ready for dialogue, Mr. Speaker, because we are the listening house. Mr. Speaker, we listen every day. That is our duty. In our counties, we listen. We listen to our MCAs, we listen to everybody, Mr. Speaker. And with this recommendation, I don't have doubt that we will provide the conducive environment for any dialogue, negotiation, so that we can move our country forward. Because this country belongs to all of us, Mr. Speaker. And we want it together, because together we stand, divided we fall. Mr. Speaker, I call my seconder of this amendment, Senator from Samburu, to second.
Proceed, Senator Lelegwe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to second this motion as tabled, the amendment to the motion as moved by Senator Kenywa. Mr. Speaker, sir, having listened to the contribution of members, and what is happening in Kenya, we thought it is rightly in place to amend the motion as in the order paper to contain the contents as moved by Senator Kinyua. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, I don't have much to say. I second. Thank you.
Take your seat, Senator Murango. Honorable Senators, I'll now proceed to propose the question that the motion be amended by deleting paragraphs 1 and 2 and substituting therefore the following. In order for the Senate to create an amiable environment and tone for the national conversation and dialogue in the country, resolves A, that the National Police Service acknowledges and apologizes for all the deaths resulting from peaceful demonstrations, that all victims of police brutality related to peaceful protests between 2003 and 2004, 2023 and 2024 be compensated by the government of the Republic of Kenya, that the National Police Service extends amnesty to all the peaceful protesters who are unlawfully detained during the peaceful protests, to call upon the Director of Public Prosecutions to withdraw all cases in court involving peaceful protesters against the Finance Bill. The Independent Police Oversight Authority moves with speed to investigate and recommend appropriate action against the police officers found culpable of using brutality against peaceful protesters. That the National Police Service submits to Parliament the revised standard operating procedures on the management of protests, demonstrations, and the use of force to contain demonstrations. Parliament puts in place guidelines on actualization of Article 37 of the Constitution with respect to how citizens can enjoy the right to picket without resulting in the loss of life or property. 2, direct the following select committees of the Senate to urgently engage relevant stakeholders, including members of the public, and consider on the following issues: public debt and public finance management. The Standing Committee on Finance and Budget, in consultation with the Parliamentary Budget Office, to independently audit the national debt and present the actual status to Parliament. 2, engages the National Treasury to submit a roadmap on a strategy to reduce the public debt to not more than 55% of the gross domestic product in present value terms, in compliance with Section 52C of the Public Finance Management Act. And 3, engages the National Treasury to identify and implement sustainable strategies to reduce the high cost of living. B, security sector reforms. The Standing Committee on National Security, Defense and Foreign Affairs engages the National Police Service on matters of security and standard operating procedures for handling demonstrations. C, on fighting corruption. The Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights engages the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission on matters corruption and action to be taken to scale up efforts to deal with corruption, especially in county governments. D, equal opportunities for all Kenyans. The Standing Committee on National Cohesion, Equal Opportunity and Regional Integration engages the Public Service Commission and the National Cohesion and Integration Commission to audit the state of employment in the public service, including county governments, and propose strategies to adhere to a meritocracy, equality, and equity of opportunities across the public service, as espoused in Article 232 of the Constitution on the values and principles of public service. E, effective public participation and stakeholder engagement. The Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights puts in place mechanisms to ensure that broader concerns for citizens, especially the youth, are received, considered, and taken into consideration in making decisions on public affairs. And 2, puts in place mechanisms that integrate new media as a medium for public participation in legislative processes. F, health sector reforms. The Standing Committee on Health to expedite and facilitate public participation in the reenactment of the Social Health Insurance Act, the Digital Health Act, and the Primary Health Acts, in compliance with the judgment of the High Court in petition number E473 of 2023, and 2, engage with the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Council of Governors with a view to standardize human resource policy for health workers across all counties. And G, education sector reforms. The Standing Committee on Education to liaise with the Minister of Education and other stakeholders with a view to resolving the concerns raised regarding junior secondary school GSS education, the new funding model for university education, and the acceptability of competence-based curriculum CBC, and report their findings and recommendations to the Senate within 30 days. Now, Honourable Senators, we need not debate on these amendments because your contributions were largely anchored on this very same subject. So with your concurrence, you may allow me to proceed to put Senator Fomeru. You're out of order. The chair is on his feet speaking, and you cannot in any way, either point of intervention or point of order, interject. And therefore, honourable senators, if with your concurrence, I may proceed to put the question so that we dispense with these amendments and we proceed to debate on the motion as amended. Do I have your concurrence, or you want to debate on the amendments? Yes, Majority Leader, what is your point of intervention? Certainly not a point of order.
Guidance. I don't think you need our position, our concurrence to put the question or to propose the motion, Mr. Speaker. That's your prerogative. I think our engagement with you is immediately thereafter. Yeah. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a request that I wanted to make to you. When we consulted at the SBC, remember, and I'd wish to remind members, if I could get the attention of the House, that this is something we agreed on before we began this motion, and therefore we cannot appear to be backtracking. We agreed, Mr. Speaker, that because it was not possible for all of us to sit down and craft the resolutions or the thoughts that were in the minds of people before the motion is tabled, we will have members of the technical team, our staffers, to sit down and wrap up all the thoughts of members as they contributed to this motion into actionable points. That is what has been done. And we agreed that towards the end of the motion, we will provide the opportunity for one of us, amongst the last people who haven't spoken to the motion, to move the motion in an amended form. Procedurally, people will be allowed to speak to it because that's our procedure. But remember, we had an agreement. I don't know why people will want again to speak to the same points that they had raised earlier, which is what has informed. To the best of my knowledge, and that's the position that we took and proposed to the House, even today at SBC, Mr. Speaker, is that once the amended motion is placed, if there will be any senators who haven't spoken to this motion in general, then they be allowed. But if there is none in the House, as I can see, there's a list of about 6 or 7 senators only who haven't spoken to the motion since we began this particular exercise, Mr. Speaker, then we proceed to call on the mover to reply and conclude on this business. Otherwise, it will look ridiculous on us, Mr. Speaker, that 2 weeks we have been speaking to the same thing and we want to begin repeating ourselves again. So I want to beg the indulgence of the House because we agreed on that before we began this motion.
Honourable Senators, yes, before I give guidance, Senator Enoch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we must all agree that we've done very well. Senator Riot, this is good. We have come a long way, Mr. Speaker. We are almost there. I want to plead with the Majority Leader to revise his position. Senator Chute, Mr. Speaker, I'm trying to address the Majority Leader to make a very important decision on a matter that affects our country. to revise his decision and just allow a few comments on the amendments, because it is true a lot of the things that have been put forward in the amendments are what we agreed on. Probably there is an issue or two that has not been captured. So that we capture everything. And Mr. Speaker, for me, Majority Leader, I actually wouldn't have a problem even finalizing on this matter even tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. So that we capture the thinking of all the leaders. And Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, because my thinking, and I could be wrong, but I'm very sure I'm not. My thinking is, the Senate now is the institution that is spearheading a national convention, a national conversation on issues, as opposed to an elite political settlement. As Speaker, we have an opportunity here. If there is one or two issues that members would want to ventilate on the amendments to add, then I think they should be given an opportunity. If there isn't, then I'll be guided, Mr. Speaker.
The Majority Leader, the Minority Leader, kindly approach the chair. So, Honourable Senators, to avoid being repetitive, because this is a motion that we have contributed for more than 2 weeks, and to avoid being repetitive, I'm going to limit the number of speakers who are going to contribute to these amendments. We are going to take 3 from the minority side and 3 from the majority side, starting with Senator Fomeru.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this indulgence and also for giving further guidance on how we dispense of this important motion touching on our country. Mr. Speaker, personally, I have no problem with all the recommendations. I support them 100%. But there is one issue that I felt it should also be given some consideration, Honourable Speaker. Honourable Speaker, I can see there is further recommendations trying to seek amnesty and to bring the country together because there are people who have lost their lives, property lost, and all these things. So, Mr. Speaker, as we consider giving amnesty to the demonstrators, there are so many other Kenyans who have lost their property. The property was looted. They have nowhere to go to. They are now to square zero, Mr. Speaker. If the government is giving all these goodies to the demonstrators, let us also give another consideration for the government also to consider compensating the Kenyans who have lost their property, Mr. Speaker. Last week in Kitengela, the whole petrol station with the shops into it were destroyed. A lot of property has been destroyed in Nairobi. In Meru, the MP for Meru, his building was shattered, the whole building. So, Mr. Speaker, as we seek to bring peace to this country, let us also consider these other Kenyans who have lost their property, who have nowhere to go to. The member of parliament for Kieni, Honorable Chieni, his property is zero now, the supermarkets and so many buildings, Mr. Speaker. So it is important, Mr. Speaker, as we consider also trying to bring peace and
what is the point of order, Senator Cheriot?
Sorry to interrupt the Deputy Speaker, but I want to maybe help him as he raises the points that he's raising, which are fairly important, that already we are debating an amended motion. Listening to his thoughts, which are very useful, would it be in order if he moved an amendment to the already amended motion? Otherwise, we have no other way of capturing whatever is adding to the motion. So I don't know at what point he intends to do that, because, you know, Mr. Speaker, after he's done with his contribution, he will not have another opportunity to move an amended version of the motion, because he will have contributed to the motion itself.
Senator Fomero, reading from your contribution, you want to make further amendments to the proposed amendments. No. You need to move your amendments. You propose, and then it's seconded. Yeah.
Give me a minute. Procedurally, you know, I was making a comment of your guidance, 3.3, so that if my comment is on the water, then I can be around to do that amendment, Mr. Speaker.
You will not have another opportunity to do that. So you conclude by proposing the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, you know I cannot draft amendment when I'm on the floor. So it's only like after my suggestion, then I can be around through this office in front of me to draft an amendment so that we can have the further amendment to the recommendation, Mr. Speaker. Even before the 3.3 could finish speaking to this matter, I'll be able now to do the amendment. And also, Mr. Speaker, you know the reason why I wanted first to move my thought on this matter is because this has been a bipartisan issue discussed between the two of us. So after giving my thoughts is when now the two sides would agree whether my points are holding water, so that now we can do further amendment, Mr. Speaker. But when I'm starting it is not possible to make an amendment before it is agreed that it is important to have this amendment. If you give me some more time, then I will stand down and then ask this to ask now to give the amendment, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. So can you synthesize your proposed amendments?
Okay, thank you.
Senator Okongo Mogene.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to seek guidance from you and from Majority Leader. We started this process together, and we were doing this process to carry Kenyans with us. And we are doing this as Kenyans and in the best interest of Kenyans. Now, all the views that were collated by members of our secretariat, and I want to also appreciate the work that has been done so far. I wanted to plead that through our leadership, I've spoken to the minority. I hope we can reach out to the majority. Mr. Speaker, you allow us, some of us who have one or two issues that we wish to be incorporated, you allow us to get that opportunity. We know you met as SBC, but because as senators also and as Kenyans who want to come what is happening in the country, who want to carry our GENZs with us, you allow us to also propose one or two amendments to the motion so that it carries all of us. I commend what Senator for Laikipia, Nderitu, has done to capture most of a good number of the proposals that came up. But there are also a number that have not been addressed in this motion. If you go through the answer, you'll be able to pick a number of suggestions that were made by senators who contributed, including, in some cases, documents were tabled on how the DPP had exercised its powers under the Constitution. Issues were raised around the exercise of investigative powers by corruption. Issues were raised around the positions of permanent secretaries. There are 51. That was a very live issue. That has not been addressed. Issues were raised around the position of cabinet administrative secretaries. That has not been captured in the motion that has been moved by Senator Kinyua. So if you gave us a chance, Mr. Speaker, since this was a bipartisan motion, we can also incorporate our views as an amendment so that you carry everybody, you carry Kenyans. We do this process having everybody on board. If we make our observation and comments here, it will not find its way to the motion. But, Mr. Speaker, if you accord us that opportunity, and I believe, Majority Leader, it's not life and death. It's not a must that we finish this today. You can accord us a chance, we talk, make our proposals, and we put it on the motion, and then the House can vote. Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Listening to the House, I raise under Standing Order number 110.1 to request that the debate be now adjourned. Mr. Speaker, the reason we are moving this, I can see there are members who are requesting and saying perhaps there are one or two things they want to add. Maybe, Mr. Speaker, then you need to guide the House. Up to what time? Because this motion has been handled in a bipartisan manner. We need to give the membership of the House sufficient time, maybe up to 5 or 6 o'clock, after which then the team from both sides of the House that sat down to consider drafted actually the amendments jointly, because it's a motion that is of a bipartisan nature. Mr. Speaker, we can sit, consider those amendments, then tomorrow we come and now conclude on this particular debate. The only thing I want to beg, Mr. Speaker, is that our colleagues to understand that it may not be possible to agree on everything and carry everyone's thoughts. We are trying as much as possible to be general, because the specifics, just like, say, for example, the very last topic that Senator Omogeni was speaking to, touches on the issue of governance and public finance management. That's why we have tasked in the motion, when we discussed at SBC, we said, let budget and finance go and look at it. Where is it that cost-saving measures can be achieved so that you run a leaner government, Mr. Speaker? It's not possible to put every specific action in a motion. That's why we are directing it to the various committees. However, Mr. Speaker, listening to the views of the colleagues, I want to request that we, in accordance to Standing Order number 110.1, that debate be adjourned until perhaps tomorrow in the morning, Mr. Speaker, when we'll have had the opportunity to benefit from the various amendments of colleagues who want to add to what has already been proposed. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minority Leader to second.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I concur and I second this matter.
Senator Chute, you may take your seat, please. Now, honorable senators, I'll proceed to propose the question, which is that the debate on the proposed amendments on this motion on the state of the nation be adjourned to tomorrow. Now, again, you may want to debate that. Procedurally, that is permissible. Or you may allow me to proceed to put the question so that we lay this matter to rest. I will now proceed to put the question that the debate on the motion on the state of the nation, on the amendments proposed on the state of the nation motion, be adjourned to tomorrow. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as many as of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. So again, just to, as a way of guidance, if there's any honorable senator wishing to propose an amendment, you have up to 5 p.m. today, so that we give the leadership time to sit and put together those amendments so that this motion can be carried in tomorrow's order paper. It is so guided. Next order. Now, honorable senators, we are going to defer the orders that are up for division and committee of the whole and move to order number 15. Clerk, proceed to call that order.
Order number 15, the Public Transport Motorcycle Regulation Bill, Senate Bills number 38 of 2023. Second reading, resumption of debate.
When debate was interrupted, Senator Eddie Okech was on his feet and he had a balance of 13 minutes. Senator Eddie.
Mr. Speaker, I think somebody was confusing Eddie Okech on this.
Clerk may have the sheet for contribution. Senator Eddie, there is absolutely no confusion. Maybe it is passage of time. You may have forgotten because it was on the 16th of May, 2024, when you rose to speak, and the House adjourned when you had a balance of 13 minutes. It's okay. You need not take the 13 minutes. You may opt to allow other senators to contribute to the motion.
Mr. Speaker, I'll yield my time to. Can I yield it to?
You cannot. Just take your seat if you have nothing useful to add. Senator Crystal Asige.
Chair, thank you very Speaker, thank you very much. I had called for the mic to speak on the previous motion.
Senator Kavindu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a very nice bill because and important one, because, Mr. Speaker, many times we see the motorbike people carrying up to 4 passengers, which is very dangerous for them. And, Mr. Speaker, if this will be regulated, it will be very good, because like when we went to Rwanda, Mr. Speaker, I saw the motorcycle riders there with their helmets and carrying only 1 passenger, and that 1 passenger also has an helmet, and that is the law, and they keep to it completely. So if this can be regulated, Mr. Speaker, it will be very good. And also, if they can also keep to their sides of the road, because many of the times when we are riding on the roads, we find so many of them, and even most of them are knocked down because they pass in between cars, and it's like they don't really care how they are riding. And Mr. Speaker, also it will be for their own good and for their own safety. If you move to many hospitals, Mr. Speaker, you will find so many of them with fractures, legs and hands, and heads which are terribly hurt, and majority of them have died. Mr. Speaker, I think this bill will really help to regulate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Wamatinga.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to this very important motion. Mr. Speaker, sir, I was at 1 week long in Luanda as an election observer, and I had an opportunity to interact with the boda riders. Mr. Speaker, it's quite fascinating to see how regulated they are, how they wash out, and how everybody can only carry 1 passenger, and that must be with a helmet. Mr. Speaker, sir, the boda sector in the transport of this country cannot be underrated. We know that there are some places where we do not have road network, where the accessibility can only be done through motorcycles. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, it is imperative that we look at laws, we look at mechanisms to make this industry thrive, but most important, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that the security of both the passengers and the riders is taken care of. Mr. Speaker, sir, gone are days when we used to have our youth go to school and get good jobs. Transport is a way that has created very many employment opportunities for a young generation. As a result, it is called upon us, Mr. Speaker, we as legislators, to ensure that we also put laws in place, mechanisms in place that ensure that once they get into the industry, they have an opportunity to grow. Once they get into the industry, they have an opportunity, if they happen to get an accident, to access not only good medical facilities, but to ensure that they are not maimed for life. Mr. Speaker, this cannot be done without us having to put in place good laws, but most importantly, also good civic education, so that our riders and their passengers will be safe. In other countries, Mr. Speaker, and most of the Western countries, we know public transport is managed by the government and by the local governments. In this country, Mr. Speaker, the transportation sector has been solely left in the hands of the private sector. We have been a bit slow and dragging our legs in formulating laws that will regulate. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, it is important today that we start looking at these issues and addressing the possible loopholes and gaps that have been left. And one of them, Mr. Speaker, is to come up with a good law that will ensure that our insurances, Mr. Speaker, they'll take care of the victims who happen to get accidents. Mr. Speaker, sir, if you happen to go to any public hospital, you will find there is a ward dedicated to these people who have broken, sustained fractures because of sustaining injuries. Unlike a motor vehicle, Mr. Speaker, where somebody has a safety belt, in motorcycle you have no opportunity to put on a safety belt, therefore the exposure is high. We must therefore look at our insurance policies so that anybody who is involved in a boda accident does not only get treatment, but they get accessible and affordable means of getting treated. As I sit down, Mr. Speaker, I would also want to urge my colleagues that we must also take our responsibility by conducting civic education so that the boda riders in Kenya can emulate the boda riders in Luanda, who only carry one passenger, and that is with a helmet and a reflective jacket. If we do that, Mr. Speaker, we'll go a long way to ensuring that we minimize the number of accidents. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, we know that most of these riders, they come from school, they are trained for 2 days to ride, and then they take on carrying passengers. Mr. Speaker, it is the high time we also come up with a mechanism to ensure that we have safe and standardized training procedure so that they know the secure and they also know the better load use so that we can afford some of these accidents. Mr. Speaker, sir, I support.
Senator Maanzo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to speak into this very important law. Mr. Speaker, the Traffic Act has not been sufficient, bearing in mind that it's a very old act from the colonial days. And in the Kibaki administration, motorcycle transport became very huge. Long time ago, motorcycles used to be owned by a few individuals, but now it became part of public transport, and therefore it was a big development. And although there could be made regulations under that Traffic Act, the Honorable Boni Alwale, in his wisdom, decided to come up with this law, which deals with the regulation of the motorcycle transport industry, and even goes on to devolve it. Now that Senate deals with the devolution, so that it can also be managed at the county's level. Mr. Speaker, a lot of motorcyclists do not have insurance. A lot of them do not even have a driving license, and a lot of them, Mr. Speaker, do not even have the gear which is necessary in case of an accident, Mr. Speaker. And again, when this culture came, Mr. Speaker, it went unregulated. Some drive opposite the road. And recently, Mr. Speaker, on my way to Makueni last week, I saw a very bad motorcycle accident. In fact, a matatu overtook and hit a motorcyclist very badly. And I stopped and quickly organized, because this was in Machakos County, through the deputy governor, and we were able to get, facilities for first aid quickly and an ambulance to save his life. And you could see the interaction between the normal motorist and the motorcyclist has not been well done. Mr. Speaker, we could even come up with pathways to be used by motorcyclists, and also the normal cycling, Mr. Speaker, which applies in many other countries. And the whole idea is to make sure that there is safety for the people being transported and for motorists themselves, Mr. Speaker. If you go to most accident wards, you will find most people have broken lips, broken skulls from motorcycle accident. The motorcyclist himself doesn't have insurance cover, and therefore compensation of such people becomes extremely difficult, Mr. Speaker. Then it goes on, Mr. Speaker, to come up with these particular regulations, comes up with a board which will manage and time to time follow up the activities of motorcycling, Mr. Speaker. It has also become a very big industry in Kenya. People are doing assembling, manufacturing, and in that scenario, I've engaged a lot of young people into employment, either the cyclists themselves. Most of them, in fact, are graduates, university graduates, and do this motorcycling transport as they look for better jobs or as they wait for placement in normal businesses or in normal companies for work. So it has also provided big-time solutions. But, Mr. Speaker, motorcyclists have also been abused during the time of elections. I saw today that a politician had sponsored motorcyclists in Nairobi to do politics, and you could see, 3, 4, 5 people loaded on one motorbike, being driven recklessly, a lot of them following each other, there is every likelihood of an accident, Mr. Speaker. And unless this is regulated by the Halwale law, then we are likely to have more trouble, more useful people injured or maimed, and ending up being a bigger expense. So we want to support this law, and I hope it is going to be received very well in the counties. Counties have really supported motorists. Politicians have supported motorcyclists a lot, especially during the campaign time. They are usually very useful. In fact, where somebody doesn't know how to use a Google map, the best person to ask directions in an area is a motorcyclist. They are very familiar with that area. Sometimes they even lead people to your destinations at a little fee, and young people are able to earn a living. So I really want to support Mr. Speaker and say that this is a very important law. We need to have it enforced so that motorcyclists can have certain exceptions, can go through trainings. Their driving license does not need necessarily be the normal driving license, could have its own class, and then the issue of gear and the proper dressing, because of the wind and even breathing systems, and a lot of them end up with a cough, or even chest problems, to make sure they are fully secured so that we can build our nation. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I second.
Senator Chirange.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. From the onset, I want to support the Public Transport Motorcycle Regulation Bill 2023 by saying it is timely. But, Mr. Speaker, before I make a few comments, allow me to thank my colleagues for standing with me when I lost my elder brother, Mwalimu Alex Meli, for the support, both compassionate and any form of support moral. My family and myself, we are grateful for the support that I got from my colleagues and the Secretariat, and I don't take it for granted. I will always be grateful. So, Speaker, allow me to say a few things on this bill. The issue of boda. Boda, I can call it a necessary evil, or it is becoming part of us. I realized the importance of boda, Mr. Speaker, when this house was invaded, because most of us decided to leave SUVs, and the significant way of escaping from this place was through a boda. And people had to change and everything, except a few people who are lucky to use other forms to escape the attack and invading of this parliament, Mr. Speaker. So even in politics, I think my brother has said very well, in politics, we use it to mobilize young people, to show how powerful you are, to show how popular you are. So it's part of us, socially, economically. Mr. Speaker, it has also, boda has made ease of transport more convenient from the village to the city. When you get stuck in traffic, Mr. Speaker, you icon a boda and you are able to access your destination in good time. While the boda economy has become very strategic and important to social economy of this country and social political, Mr. Speaker, it continues to be a very, also a source. When you go to Moi Teaching and Referral and even KNH and some of our hospitals in counties, Mr. Speaker, trauma centers and emergency centers will not go with 10 minutes or 2 minutes without a boda accident victim, Mr. Speaker, being taken to the hospital. What we need to do, while the boda sector is critical for the growth of the economy of this country, since the advent of President Mwai Kibaki, Mr. Speaker, we must also bring in certain decency and regulation and some form of decency within a specific in boda sector, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I agree with Senator Boni that it is time to bring the boda sector in order and to be able. Mr. Speaker, you are aware, by the beginning of this year, 6 January, according to United Nations records, we have about 3 million bodas across the country. So it shows you it is a critical sector that it cannot be ignored. While we agree there are challenges that could be here and there, we must support. Mr. Speaker, over 100% of people who work with boda sector from villages to cities and towns are young people, Mr. Speaker, who largely depend as the way of earning their living, Mr. Speaker, both in terms of business growth and in terms of earning their daily wage, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, to me, this I thought, and I remember the last time it was being moved, I thought I should at least through the God grace, I should be able to contribute on this bill, because I find it myself as the leader and the senator of Nandi that we must find a way. Mr. Speaker, there are also challenges. While we agree boda sector is important, we also have challenges where rogue criminals are now using boda to create insecurity. Sometimes the bodas have become accessories of criminals. Some bodas, I'm not saying all, where people are being attacked. You remember in some of roads of this city, if you want to enjoy the breeze and the sun of the city, somebody and you are operating on your phone or any phone, if your window is open, the easiest way for some of the criminals is to use boda snatch and then they drive off, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a critical sector, but we must bring order to the sector. You know, politicians, Mr. Speaker, we are the greatest consumers of boda services, especially around political season and when you want to make a statement. So it has also aesthetic value in terms of politics of this country. Mr. Speaker, the only issue I would want to propose is that I saw in clause number 12 that the rider of a two-wheel motorcycle, we need to encourage, I don't know the place of tuk-tuk. I don't know, the mover and the owner of the bill should see where to put tuk-tuk, because it is three-legged and it is common in Mombasa. I just saw Senator Faki here. It is common in Mombasa, so how can we put together? So, Speaker, even the cart pushing, the one mkokoteni, it has two wheels. So I don't know, you need to be very precise, Senator Boni, in terms of, because I can be pushing mkokoteni, and you might demand, the police can stop me and say, where is your license of pushing this mkokoteni or cart pusher in terms of going? So I think, Mr. Speaker, we must, and then the tuk-tuk place somewhere, the tuk-tuk, so that, you know, most of short distances. This also a very critical sector, especially in places like Mombasa. And my sister, Senator Miraj, will tell you it's very critical in terms of moving in the economy of that city, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another issue that I wanted to say is that I agree, just like Matatu sector, Mr. Speaker, let us use SACCOs for enforcement of strict within the traffic department. Because if you are operating a boda in CBD and we notice the number of that boda being involved in criminal element, we can track the SACCO or the cooperative society. Mr. Speaker, those two things will happen. One, it will allow us to enforce decency and order within the sector. Number two, Mr. Speaker, it will also give us a chance to allow this cooperative society to build themselves to become economic powerhouse. Mr. Speaker, so that even when they are pursuing the loans interest, they want to build the capacity of boda and many others, Mr. Speaker, it is very critical in terms of, so SACCO, savings and cooperative society will allow us the enforcement of traffic rules or follow-up of issues and then economic empowerment. Mr. Speaker, I don't know, since Kakamega is my neighborhood, before boda came in, there was other boda of using the bicycle. So the bicycle placement also should consider, because I realize in some areas there is still the bicycle that you use energy to push through. Because before boda was introduced in Kenya, Mr. Speaker, many people used to use boda, the one that is the normal bicycle, as opposed to motorcycle, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another issue that I wanted to mention in terms is the training of boda. I agree that we need to train boda, Mr. Speaker, to allow them to ensure that when we train them, Mr. Speaker, we ensure that they are compliant with the traffic rules. Because the sad reality, Mr. Speaker, especially in the village where some of us come from, apart from few who come from cities, Mr. Speaker, is you find somebody training in the morning to drive a boda. By lunch, by 11 a.m., he's driving around. By 1 p.m., he's carrying passengers. And that is when we had most of the accidents. So the issue of licensing, I think the NTSA and other agencies within the transport sector should look at access. I don't know whether we'll use the normal BCE classes, the normal driving license that we have. I don't know whether we should issue, or when we introduce another class within the driving license, Mr. Speaker, to allow ease access of driving license for many young people. And I think CDF can play a critical role. I normally see members of National Assembly mobilizing boda. Training, they should also train them to acquire driving license to ensure we are more safe when we are using boda, Mr. Speaker, in terms of going into the future. The fourth point, Mr. Speaker, that I wanted to make is on the issue of employment contracts. I think what we can say, it should be compliant with the labor relations or labor laws, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that the employment contracts, because I know people who use startups business, and we had startup bill, Mr. Speaker, we were able to, in the startups of businesses, we are able, there are many people in the village who start a small business, they buy a motorbike and then they hire a young man or a young lady within that region, and Mr. Speaker, they are able to be hired. I think what we can agree, Mr. Speaker, is let us, I've seen in clause number 14, where Senator Kalwala has indicated, is we can just say mutatis mutandis in terms of the Labor Relations Act and other employment should be used so that we ensure, Mr. Speaker. And then also to prevent, sometimes you beat boda riders who are below 18. Driving bodas in our centers, we should also be able to agree. And in fact, in training, Mr. Speaker, we also agree. In clause number 18, the County Transport and Safety Board, Mr. Speaker, one of the most harassed boda, especially in Kapsabet, Nandi Hills, Mosoriot, Kabiet, the complaints I normally get is from the traffic police officers. The most harassed is the boda. I don't know why, I've never understood. There is nowhere when you go in this region, the traffic police or the police are in good terms with the boda sector. But I think with the County Transport and Safety Board, we should involve and ensure they are being trained, civic education is being carried so that they are not being also exploited. But also, as the boda sector demands that they should be respected and not harassed by the police, we also, Mr. Speaker, they must also be compliant in terms of driving license, as my brother has indicated here, in terms of compliance, Mr. Speaker. Sometimes you drive, most of us are drivers, and sometimes you drive at middle of the night, and before you know it, you brake, you just notice there is a motorcycle ahead of you. And it does not have reflection, they don't have a reflector jackets, there is no helmet, there is no reflector lights or the parking lights, they don't have headlights, Mr. Speaker, and that's what has caused accidents in our roads. And you know, sometimes it's out of ignorance, because, and I know maybe Nairobi does not have such, but when you go to where we come from, you just encounter boda on the middle of the road, and fatalities might occur, Mr. Speaker. So this county transport and safety is that the compliance of boda is before they must be approved to use the road. For example, they should have proper working headlights, indicators, ensure the engine is functioning, the tires are well maintained, Mr. Speaker, they have reflector jackets, and I'm happy the law has specified that you must have 2 helmets and must have 2 reflector jackets. When you go to Rwanda, Mr. Speaker, you will notice those things have been compliant. I have never known in this country, Mr. Speaker, whether we go for quality or quantity. Because the boda rider, Mr. Speaker, I don't know whether when you carry more passengers, is it better than complying with the 2 or you earn more? Because I don't know, is it quantity or quality? Because you get, especially the people taking children to school, they are carrying almost 6 children using 1 boda, Mr. Speaker. Yet the law is very clear that apart from the rider, you have 2 helmets, 1 for the rider, 1 for the passenger, 1 reflector for the rider, and 1 for the passenger you are carrying. I can bet on you, if we were to go to the entire country, you will get very few border borders who wear jackets that are reflective, Mr. Speaker, and mostly when you see them wearing, you are likely to encounter, when you are in Luanda, to encounter they are wearing reflector jacket that bears the image of Senator Otsotsi. So, Mr. Speaker, we must agree, how do we ensure that we implement this issue of reflector and the county transport? Mr. Speaker, on the issue of delivery motorcycles, I agree, Mr. Speaker, in clause number 19, is very critical, because now with the Uber Eats, there is now Uber riders, the people delivery parcels within the city. It is a critical sector. What I just wanted to emphasize, and I know all my colleagues agree with me, the delivery riders, Mr. Speaker, are very critical. If you want to send something to Mombasa Road, or even to somewhere in Thika Road, the easiest and faster way to deliver your parcel, especially within a short distance, is through border. And I think, in addition, and I've noted when they are issuing special license, especially Uber Eats, Mr. Speaker, because they deliver food, they must be public health, and I've agreed there is special licenses that are being given, so that when they deliver food to, especially, I remember a few weeks, Mr. Speaker, when you were in session, after some dysfunctionality of the House, Mr. Speaker, some of us used to order food through Uber Eats. And you can imagine, Mr. Speaker, that that if they are not complying in terms of public health. So we need also, in these special licenses, we need to be precise. So it's because when you are, if a rider delivers to you food, and that food end up disturbing your stomach or makes you unwell, who do you all liable? Is it vicarious liability? What do you do? So we must look at those special licenses, Mr. Speaker, and it is very critical when they are doing that, because they can deliver anywhere, Mr. Speaker, as I have indicated, going into the future. Mr. Speaker, in closing, because I have seen my time is up, I agree generally with the penalties that are there, but we must also be realistic in terms of penalties, Mr. Speaker, because most of these young people who are riders, they don't own those borders or motorcycles. They end up, they carry, they are being hired. So I think in terms of penalty, we must also be reasonable, because most of them are young. You can imagine if we convict them, they are young, you can hinder their chances, Mr. Speaker, of getting jobs in future, advancing in their careers, and many others, Mr. Speaker. Up and short, Mr. Speaker, I think this is a very good law. I want to encourage the border sector to take chance to give the opinion in terms of improving of this. This is a good start for this public transport sector motorcycle. We need as a country to have a conversation around it, Mr. Speaker. As I said in the beginning of at the beginning of this year, we had about 3 million borders. So imagine if every border in Kenya generates an average of 1,500 shillings per day. That's billions and billions of shillings, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, we ask the border, as we push for their decency in terms of environment, they must also behave in terms of decency going into the future, avoid criminal aspects within the sector, so that we can ensure all of us, Mr. Speaker, have a public transport sector that goes into the future. And I hope the cabinet minister that will come in as the roads minister, Mr. Speaker, will ensure, Mr. Speaker, that the sector is well regulated. We don't want to see attention only to aviation sector and road sector. This also sector is very important, Mr. Speaker. And when a new minister will take over, and I want to believe the new one will be more listening and more sober, Mr. Speaker, is we want to see a more appropriate engagement with all sector players, regardless of who they are, Mr. Speaker, going into the future, Mr. Speaker. So with those very many remarks, Mr. Speaker, allow me to support this bill, and we will discuss about the three-wheel about tuk-tuk, so that we can, and the issue of mkokoteni and the rest, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with those very many remarks, I support. I thank you.
Senator Omtata.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. for for the opportunity to comment on this bill, and I also express my condolences again to my brother, Senator. And I would like to begin by recognizing that boda originated in Busia. So this is a very important motion for the people of Busia, and I would request that Senator Halwale finds a way of having the state erect a memorial to the unknown to the unknown first boda rider. And the monument should be established or erected in Busia, where boda came from. Number two, when you look at the industry, that a lot of people have gone into it, a lot of youngsters, and the main challenge for me is the training. Many boda riders don't have licenses. I don't know if it's called riding licenses or driving licenses, but they don't have them. And I think given the impact of the absence of licenses on public health through injury and deaths, I would request that maybe as a public health measure, the state steps forward to underwrite or to subsidize the training of motorcycle riders across the country, so that poverty cannot be an excuse for not having a driving license or a riding license. And it would be not a waste of public funds, because the recovery in terms of prevention of what otherwise then becomes medical care or burial expenses for those who fall victim to the accidents would be much, much less than the money that would be required to equip and train these people to be efficient riders on the road. The other thing that this country needs to do very seriously is we need to get to the point whereby we realize that it's not only people who drive motor vehicles who pay taxes. And therefore, there is no justification for building roads only for people who drive motor vehicles. We must build roads for pedestrians and cyclists. The idea that boda have to struggle and fight for space on roads used by four-wheeled vehicles is in itself not a good thing, and one of the reasons why many fatalities occur when you get motor vehicle versus motorcycle collisions. So I would urge that we need to come up with road designs and build roads for all taxpayers, those who cannot afford motor vehicles but walk on foot. You will see in Nairobi every morning when you go along Bagadi Way, and every evening, we have people who walk from Kibra, from Kawangware, going to industrial area. They don't have a place to walk. They have to keep on struggling on the edge of the road. Some get occasionally knocked down by motor vehicles. And this is something that needs to be addressed, that the road design must be inclusive. Our constitution, one of the national values of this country is inclusivity, under Article 10. Further, much as boda is important, we must wake up to the fact that Nairobi cannot continue being run by boda. Nairobi requires a proper public transport system. I've never gone to any country, any serious country where the capital city runs on boda like Nairobi. We need to get a proper public transport system in Nairobi. It's a strategic requirement. It cannot wait. Public transport is a key component of human resource. Our human resources need to be able to move freely and easily across. So we must not be waiting to modernize on motorcycles. Let it be a stopgap measure, but going forward, our cities must be weaned off the need to rely on motorcycles and the like. I've got a small problem on Section 13, Clause 1D, which says every passenger on a two-wheeled motorcycle shall sit astride in the seat fixed behind the rider's seat. That statement has got cultural implications. In some areas, our sisters may not be comfortable sitting astride the motorcycle, unless we are going to insist that they wear trousers. So we have to be sensitive to the dressing of women, because they are women. we must be sensitive to that, because it's a cultural issue that we cannot make a law that offends some cultures. Let us be sensible, and maybe we may find a better word for that. And even you can imagine, in almost all situations, I don't see a situation, unless a lady is wearing a trouser, to force her to sit astride on a motorcycle might demand her to expose more flesh than she's comfortable doing. So let us look at that. And just like you have done at 13.2b, where it says persons with disabilities will be exempted from the requirement to sit astride while being carried. The Lord put on the petrol tank and on the control bus, and then leave the rear to carry other things. So I would ask my brother to look at that, if you can address that kind of loading of motorcycles. I think in terms of motorcycle ambulances, there's a requirement that they will be operated by trained medical personnel. Now, I don't know what trained medical personnel is. Maybe there will be need to look at that. And I also don't know whether we shall be requiring medical doctors to be operating these motorcycles. So I think maybe there's need to do some clarification on that particular provision, so that we can know what's the role of this trained medical personnel on these motorcycle ambulances. So they are talking of paramedics to be done to operate these vehicles or not. Let us get some clarification. The other thing is that in terms of delivery vehicles and passenger vehicles, in terms of boda, what I know is that sometimes, because of the limitation in business opportunity, many boda riders act both as delivery agents and also as a passenger vehicles. So maybe the Honorable Halwale should look at that and see how he could capture that unique aspect of boda. Because one of the interesting qualities of boda is that they end up doing everything. Some people even use them for plowing, these motorcycles. So I think it will need to be a bit of some creativity around that to be able to govern that. Otherwise, this is, to me, is an excellent bill whose time is long overdue, and which ought to have come with the lifting when Mr. Okema was the Minister for Finance, and they lifted the tax on the motorcycles, which led to the motorcycles being affordable to ordinary people, and therefore the expansion of boda and the winning out of bicycles. Maybe at that time they should have looked at this and made such a bill to be able to regulate this area. And it's a very, very important law whose time is long overdue, and I support it with amendments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Back to support the bill. Honorable Speaker, the border sector actually is a very important sector in this country and in many parts of Africa, especially in East Africa, in terms of, job creation, in terms of, access and the easy transport. However, Honorable Speaker, today as you looked around Nairobi, there are so many young men and women, especially men, who are engaged in the business of the border. And for sure, even ladies are involved because they know they don't ride, but they employ young men to at least help them, and so that they can be getting also some income out of it. Many students in the universities make joint ventures, so at least they can be able to earn something out of border business. And therefore, the sector, I think, is very important in terms of the economy. However, Honorable Speaker, having said that it employs many people and it's actually a source of income, it's also that it has its own challenges in terms of, discipline. Most of our riders, as has been said earlier, are not trained. Some of them, they become menace actually on the road. You see them crisscrossing the highways, and as a result, many of them are knocked down or they cause accident. And in times of accident, they also become a nuisance to other people, especially the other vehicles owners and the drivers. They knock you down, from rear aside, and when maybe they are knocked or they hit you, they come to intimidate the other drivers. They come like bees, they just come together, and then they come and intimidate the other Kenyans, even when they are actually wrong. I think there's need to have some discipline within that place. They also, they have come now, some of them are involved in the criminal acts, and they aid even the criminals, and many of the criminals take advantage on borders. And therefore, it is actually very important to have been, a very important sector, but I think we need to have a bit of regulated, the sector needs to be regulated on a serious note. Maybe we also need to have some feasible number plates. Some of them don't use their genuine number plates. They change their number plates. They get number plates from the old grounded borders, and I think there needs to be a proper registration, so that at least we can be able to know. Actually, if the numbers are big and visible, then it is easy to identify whoever does the wrong things. As the title said, they need also to register in cooperative, so that this they can be tracked. Anybody is engaged in any act of crime. One other thing is actually, I think the best thing is in other world, when you see, we have parking lots for the borders and bicycles. And you cannot just go and park your bicycle or your boda or motorbike in Howley. So I think we equally need, in places like Nairobi, we need to have a zoning areas where the borders can park their vehicle, their motorbikes, and anybody who wants to get a ride, then it's easy for the person to go there and get about the border. But however, what's happening currently, borders are in all over the city, and I think it has become now a problem. You see, even now, the time of demonstrations and all these things, you don't know who is a genuine rider and who is the criminal. So they abate the criminal acts. I think the best thing is we need to give them a special lessons. They have it, but it's not easy to inspect or to stop them the times of riding around. So I think we need to have at least come up with a system that at least will bring some discipline within the sector. For sure, many Kenyans, if you are hearing that now we have been told that almost 3 million borders are there, and having 3 million, that means that at least employed many more young men who are at least jobless. And I think that the only thing that we need to do is to improve the sector, so at least you can have value for them, for whatever the business they're doing. So instead of put them as criminals, because now in most times we associate them with criminals, because at times somebody borrows, maybe they take somebody, and then you see the next day this person is either killed or been robbed. So I think despite the many advantages, there are many more disadvantages as a result of the behaviors of the riders. Therefore, I think we need to have one other thing is actually we need to do some kind of testing. Riding test. The riders should undergo some testings and some kind of business regulations. They should be regulated. And they actually, I think, this could do it on an annual basis, so at least we can know who is the genuine rider and who is not genuine rider, and then actually the ownerships and all these things, the logbooks, because these things are very cheap. Some of them are cheap, and some of them are just at a cheap price, and the genuine owners are not known, most of them. So I think the whole sector must be reformed, and at least to some senses, put to the riders. And we need to have discipline among the young men and who are riding these things. But however, one other thing is actually the government can also support young men who wants to engage themselves as riders so that they can make some business by giving them cooperative loans and all these things. So this they can be able to, it can become a source of income for them, and they can easily access money for them to buy the motorbikes, so that at least the young men who are not employed, the GENZs now who are complaining of a lack of employment, can also be engaged on such kind of businesses. With those few remarks, I beg to support the Honourable Speaker.
Senator Ososi Gonfrey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to also support this bill, the Public Transport Motorcycle Regulations Bill 2023 by Honorable Senator Halwale. From the onset, Mr. Speaker, I think this bill is very timely, and I would, from the onset, say I would support it. Mr. Speaker, you know that boda is now the leading employer of our youth. Almost everywhere in this country, you find so many youth who are jobless, engaged in this kind of trade, because it's the only thing they can do now that we have an employment crisis in this country. Mr. Speaker, though we appreciate that boda industry has employed our youth, but there are quite a number of challenges. Mr. Speaker, there are challenges on how these young people are paid, because more than 80% of boda riders do not own those motorcycles. They are owned by other people, probably the teachers in the village or members of parliament like me. They only do the job to ride the motorcycle. We also appreciate that some unscrupulous individuals have come up with companies to try and milk from these youth. And maybe in my debate on this, I would encourage the owner, Senator Halwale, to also bring up that issue. We have a number of companies which pretend to be giving loans to the boda riders, give them loans, but a few months before the completion of those loans, you find that the motorcycle has been taken away when those riders have just completed nearly 80% of the payment. So that has been a major problem. And I have sat in this house when Senator Cheregei has brought that matter before this house. This is a big problem. Mr. Speaker, we also have to appreciate a number of our youth have been killed through accidents on these motorcycles. A number of our youth have been injured as a result of motorcycles. And even passengers have been injured. In our various counties, we have attended so many funerals of boda-related accidents. And something needed to be done on this. And I want to congratulate my colleague Halwale for coming up with this particular bill, which when I read it, I think it is going to address the problem that we have. We need to make boda industry a meaningful employment industry, not an industry that is going to take advantage of our youth, not an industry that is going to cause death, injuries, and even crime. So this bill addresses all those challenges, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just like Senator Busia said, there are a few areas maybe we would need to consider amendments. And one of the areas is on clause 5, which talks about the board. The board in its composition, you don't see the representation of boda owners and riders. Is largely composed of county officials. So I would propose that we have representation of the riders and the owners. Mr. Speaker, whereas I support the idea of the board, but then this also exposes something. And this something is that many of us have been asking, what is the use of NTSA on matters of managing accidents in this country and managing transport in this country? Mr. Speaker, NTSA has failed. They have completely failed. They should have been at the forefront of helping this country deal with the problem of boda industry in this country, especially on licensing, on safety and all that. But NTSA has failed. They have failed bodas, they have failed on public transport, and basically that body is not serving the purpose that it was established to serve. So I support the creation of this body, but at the same time, Mr. Speaker, the bill needs to tell how this body is going to be financed. It is silent on that. Where is the money going to run this board going to come from? So that we don't have a scenario where the board now becomes an institution that is going to fine our bodas, that is going to introduce extraneous levies to bodas and make the industry even more expensive to run and send many of our youth out of employment. So that aspect of how it is going to be financed must be very clear in the bill so that they don't run rogue and start introducing unreasonable levies and charges to our bodas. Mr. Speaker, the issue, the relationship between the owner and the rider, this bill has really gave a reflection on that, but I think on the issue of employment, that is clause 14, where it says every owner of a motorcycle who engages the services of a rider shall enter into a written employment contract with the rider. And then it goes on to specify what is going to be contained in the employment agreement. This is one area that, Mr. Speaker, has to be looked at very keenly so that to make it easy for the owners of motorcycle to continue operating in this industry, so that the salary or any other benefits that accrue to the rider are manageable. Because if we leave it hanging like that, Mr. Speaker, the danger is that if you go to Employment Act, the terms under Employment Act may be difficult for most of these owners to comply. Issues of medical, issues of minimum wage, issues of insurance and all that. So I think this is one area that we need to look at so that we don't discourage investment in this sector. We need to encourage investment in this sector, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the bill also talks about motorcycle ambulances. Motorcycle ambulances that are going to be equipped with medical equipment and supplies. Mr. Speaker, this is going to be very useful, especially in rural areas where we have a problem with the road network, where we have a problem with accessibility, and still our people still need to access medical care. So I fully support that. This is actually an innovation. This is a proposal that we'll be looking forward to see how it's going to work so that our people who are sick, elderly people in the villages, will have access to medical ambulances through these motorcycles. Mr. Speaker, I have seen also the bill also talks about three-legged motorcycle. I think this is tuk-tuk, and I wanted to remind Senator Cherigay that indeed the bill has captured tuk-tuk. The bill also has talked about delivery bodas, the bodas that deliver things like food or goods and all that, and how these bodas are going to be managed. They should not be used for any other purposes for which they are designated. They will strictly be used for deliveries. So all in all, Mr. Speaker, I think this is a wonderful bill. All we need to look is to look for maybe a few areas which we need to enhance, particularly on the issue of financing and the issue of ensuring that this bill will not lead to additional financial burden to the owners and to the riders, so that this business should be encouraged. This business should not be discouraged due to cost. The other thing, Mr. Speaker, is inspection of motorcycles, bodas. This is one area that the police in our counties have, on numerous occasions, harassed our youth who the only crime is to own a boda and operate a boda. Harassment of boda is on the increase, Mr. Speaker. As I think something has to be done. And this bill has to be very clear that inspection of motorcycles should not lead to harassment. Because if you open up again that aspect of inspection, there are some police officers who will take advantage of that, and they use that to extort money from the poor bodas. They use that to intimidate the bodas and harass them. So the issue of harassment of our bodas has to be addressed in this bill as well, so that the bodas have to comply with the law on matters of safety, having a helmet, having all the other accessories they need to have. But unnecessary harassment by police must be stopped, and this bill, I think, has to talk about that. And the boda owners and riders must have a recourse where there is unjustifiable harassment by the police. Mr. Speaker, all in all, I want to say that this bill covers almost all the challenges that we face in this boda industry. Issues of drugs movement here and there have been addressed in Clause 20. The issues of offenses have been addressed, and I think with the further amendments, particularly on the issue of Clause 26, that talks about a fee of 100,000 shillings for an offense committed by boda. I think 100,000 shillings is too high for our youth in the village who are doing this industry. So that figure should be scaled down so that the offenders have a responsibility to pay for their offenses. But at the same time, the amount should be manageable so that we do not discourage our unemployed youth from earning their living through this boda. Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I want to support this bill with amendments and encourage members to also support this bill with amendments. Mr. Speaker, I support.
Senator Ososi, since you have not tabled any amendments, your statement might not be accurate. Maybe unless you propose, maybe you intend to make the amendments. Okay. Senator Sheikh Mariam Omar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, first, I appreciate and thanks to Senator Boni to bring up with this bill, which one way or another, it will solve most of the challenges of the boda rider. Mr. Speaker, when in the bill there is a board, on that board, composition of the board, as other senators also highlighted, there must be a boda association, because currently we have a boda associations. So Senator Boni, so take note so that at least boda associations must be included. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to these board registrations, this will also tell us the number of boda the cycle in counties, because I can see there is a cross-county recognition, which is a very good proposal, because to know how many bodas in each counties. Mr. Speaker, on this registration of motorcycle by board of directors, board member, there must be also penalties when it comes to registrations, because sometimes they don't even see the requirements, what is required. Maybe the board member can register anyone. So on what scenario we can maybe the registration of that motorcycle has not been correctly done. So there must be also take note on that one, the penalties to the members of the board of directors, board members who make registration without checking the requirement. There is a registration of all the members, all the registration of riders also register with the cooperative society. In fact, I am also the sponsor of cooperative society. In fact, you give me a clue, I can put as an amendment to take care of boda. On the training, Mr. Speaker, we must have a unique license for the motorcycle, which must be different from other transports. On sitting position, as Senator Busia, I think there is a clause which said exemption disability. So you have to include disability and women, so that it can cater some culture, because I cannot sit the way other people are seated. So you have to take care of that position. Mr. Speaker, the private and some bodas are for private and some are for commercial. So when you stand at the roadside, you wanted transport, it must be seen that this coming person is, boda coming is for private and commercial. So we must have a unique differentiation between the private and commercial motorcycle. When it comes to also offenses of 100,000, you have to also differentiate the private and the commercial one, so that the private one can pay that 100,000, but for others, riders, they cannot. So you have to differentiate also that one. A requirement of the road. Mr. Speaker, boda cycles, they have simplified the work of many of the Kenyans. So we have to have a private path in one side, so that they have a section for different from the four-wheel drivers. And also maybe we have to restrict when giving contracts to the contractors, they must have for maybe an engineer who's doing inspections must also inspect that there is a road as a scope in the BQ that must be done for motorcycle. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of boda for ambulance, in fact, that is what we are using on our area, because we need each counties, each health sectors must have 2 or 3 as an emergency ambulance, so that at least people can access the health sector at the right time when they need. Mr. Speaker, the other one is when you are registration of this motorcycle, maybe the senator can take note on that. Sometimes they register, the valuation must be there. Because sometimes somebody can come and say, register for me this, and at the end of the day, the motorcycle is worn out. It is unrepairable. So it must be some inspections and valuation must be done. Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I support with amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Senator Professor Margaret Kamar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute to this bill. First, may I start by congratulating our colleague, Senator Boni Alwale, for coming up with a very beautiful piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, for those of us who have traveled to Rwanda, we are seeing this as a very important step in the right direction. In Rwanda, you don't see people, more than one person being a passenger in a boda. In fact, the bodas are so organized that when we were there for the sports, we kept asking ourselves what happened to us. How do we introduce motorbikes and confuse the road with the same? So I want to congratulate our colleague for coming up with this bill, and I support it. A few areas, Mr. Speaker, that I would like to request Senator Alwale to look at. In Section 5F and G, he is talking of membership to the board, and he's talking of 4 persons appointed by the county executive member responsible for transport, and in AG, it is 2 members appointed by the county executive committee member responsible for transport to represent groups with special interests. My assumption, Mr. Speaker, is that Section 9 is what is referring to members of SACCOs, and maybe the new association that has been introduced by some members. The improvement I wanted to request him to look into is that the executive member should not be appointing on behalf of the representative groups. We are in a stage in this country where public participation is very good and representation is done by the groups themselves. So it may be necessary for him to tweak that a little bit so that we actually have the representative groups appointing members to this board, because this board is going to be the driving force. In fact, I was personally impressed by this law because it is taking the boda business to the county, and it is very important that the counties take responsibility for this because of the proximity of the activities of bodas. So my suggestion is that first, this representation of groups be a result of an election or selection by the groups themselves, be it the owners or the riders. But so that's one thing I want to suggest. Number 2, that actually he switches again between F and G so that we have only two appointees to come from the CEC in F and 4 to come from the representative groups, because it is very important when we are talking of regulating a system to have more representatives of the actors. So I'm bringing that in, Mr. Speaker, at this point of suggestion, but I note what you have said to a colleague earlier, that if we want to introduce as amendments, we will introduce. But I want him to think through so that when we come back with amendments, then it works well. I am so impressed with the registration of boda bodas and their membership being within a body that can be felt and that can be seen. Mr. Speaker, I don't think there's any of us who has not attended a funeral of somebody who has died because of boda boda. It is therefore very important that we consider this because it is the transport that is most commonly used. It is the transport that reaches every corner of our country. Mr. Speaker, the other one that I want to join colleagues that have raised is 13(2)(b), where is introducing persons with disabilities to be exempted from the requirements of sitting astride. I want to persuade our senator that that should be persons with disabilities and women, because when the law takes effect and we have only one passenger in a boda boda, it will be possible to sit even facing one direction. So I would like to persuade that that could even come from him himself, so that we reduce on our amendments, so he can have his own amendments coming in. That, to me, would really make a lot of sense. The one question that I have, which I think, again, Senator Alwale should think about, is 18(3). 18, actually, the whole of 18. Motorcycle ambulances. I have been trying to imagine how an ambulance, a motorcycle can be an ambulance. I know we are using it now because there is nothing else. But we must force our governors to have ambulances equitably distributed in a county. If we allow these boda ambulances, Mr. Speaker, we will make it so easy for governors to ignore very rural areas in two ways: provision of the ambulance and provision of roads. Because the reason our people are using boda bodas now for ambulances is because there are no roads. They are using very narrow paths to take people to hospital. We know that in some areas, you even have to carry people literally using a sack and 4 men to carry a patient to the main road. I think we should really ask governors to take responsibility of our health. Health is a right in our constitution. Health is a right that should cover everybody, and we should not give them an excuse to have any other form of ambulance. They should give that ambulance because that is what everybody pays taxes for. Equity and equality when it comes to health, Mr. Speaker, should not degenerate to anything else. Finally, Mr. Speaker, Article 22 on insurance. I'm reading that and I'm asking myself, is this insurance covering death compensation or injury compensation? The line is very attractive, that every owner of the motorcycle shall have, at the minimum, a motor commercial public service insurance cover. It is my hope that the arrival of an insurance will discourage careless driving of these motorcycles. And the only way we can do that is when we make sure that actually there is compensation. Because in most cases, people who have died out of accidents of motorcycles or who have been injured out of motorcycle accidents have been left on their own. In fact, they part ways with the motorbike on the road. The motorbike owner is normally always different from the motorbike rider. So the motorbike rider goes to take care of his own injuries, and any accident victim does not get any assistance anywhere. So I I persuade again our colleague to think through how this motorcycle insurance can take care of injuries and take care of death compensation in a way to deter careless driving and to stop owners from hiring careless riders. With those remarks, Mr. Speaker, I once more congratulate our colleague, Senator Adwale, and really mention that this is a bill that is long overdue. It will bring order to our country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Professor. Next is Senator from Muranga, Jonyutu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say that I support this bill, very well thought out by our colleague and senior Senator Boni Halwale, Mr. Speaker, because boda has become a very important sector in our economy, Mr. Speaker. We have very many young men and sometimes women that are employed in this particular sector, Mr. Speaker, whether owning the bikes or having been engaged by people who can be able to invest in the bikes, Mr. Speaker. And so this is an important sector that needs regulation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, boda, apart from employing many young men and women, is an occurrence that has also made accessibility to some interior places easy, Mr. Speaker. There are places that were very hard to access before bodas came around. And so it's important that we regulate this particular sector, and I see this bill as one that is going to help very much in this particular matter, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have been having very many deaths from boda accidents, Mr. Speaker. And some of us have even lost relatives from boda accidents, Mr. Speaker. And one thing that has been a denominator in most of these deaths, Mr. Speaker, is a failure by the boda users, both the riders and their passengers, Mr. Speaker, to wear helmets, because sometimes they are not provided by the riders, Mr. Speaker. And so I am excited about Section 10 of this particular bill, Mr. Speaker, where we are talking about, especially two, where Senator Halwale has talked about this board that will ensure that our boda riders undergo safe and defensive riding techniques, Mr. Speaker, in order for them to prevent these deaths. Some of them do not even understand the risks that are involved in riding without their helmets on, Mr. Speaker. And like Professor Kamala has said, going to Rwanda, Kigali, Mr. Speaker, then you get challenged as a Kenyan, especially when you see that any boda rider there and their passengers properly fit their helmets, and that none of the motorcycles, Mr. Speaker, will ferry more than one passenger. It's something that we should borrow, and this is something that this bill has really addressed, Mr. Speaker, through these regulations. Mr. Speaker, another thing that is coming out very well in this bill, and that's why I support it, is the idea of regulating this particular sector. Because as we speak, we have no regulation in this particular sector, Mr. Speaker. You will see bodas actually sometimes riding on the opposite side of the road because there is no regulation, in the full glare of traffic police officers. And so regulation, Mr. Speaker, because we do not want a country that is lawless, a country where we have a big sector that is not regulated. And so I'm very excited about especially section also 6B, where this board is supposed to, Mr. Speaker, to oversee that all boda riders are registered and licensed, so that we can also know who is it that is actually operating a boda. Who is it that is actually riding these bodas? Because without this particular regulation, then crime can also be committed without us knowing exactly who did what, Mr. Speaker. One other thing that is very important in the same section 6 is developing and implementing programs to promote road safety, including training and education of riders and passengers. Mr. Speaker, these young men and women sometimes just leave secondary school or finish their secondary school studies, and because they know how to ride a bicycle, they only need some instruction of about 30 minutes, and they become riders because, of course, they can balance on the motorcycle. And the following day, they are scouting for passengers, Mr. Speaker. So I think they need to be trained, as the bill suggests and proposes, trained also on safety, their own safety, the safety of their passengers. Because sometimes they are ignorant, they are innocent but ignorant, Mr. Speaker. And so this is something that is very progressive. Going, Mr. Speaker, to number 8, Mr. Speaker, I'm also excited about the fact, actually not number 8, but number 9, the fact that they will be required by this board to register in a savings and credit society. Because we do not want our young people to just go out there, make some money, spend all of it in the evening, and at the end of the day have no saving. Because we do not want to have somebody riding a boda up to when they are 70. And Mr. Speaker, where I come from, they say that old age feeds on youth. So because these operators are young, they need also to develop a culture, and I believe this particular provision will encourage them to develop a culture of saving so that they can also be able to get credit. So that if I'm riding somebody's boda today as a hired rider, that if I'm able to make some savings, I can also be able to get credit, and as a first step, be able to, of course, acquire my own boda, so that tomorrow I'll also be self-employed and I can also create employment for somebody else. And so that is something that is very progressive, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the requirement that before you are allowed to operate a motorcycle, that you have to complete a training course approved by the board is also very good, very important. Because, Mr. Speaker, this is an engine-driven cycle. We cannot continue having, and some of them move at speeds of 100 kilometers per hour. That is risky for somebody who has not been trained. It is risky for the rider. It is risky for the passenger, Mr. Speaker. And these are some of the things that this bill is bringing a remedy to, and we must support this particular bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have been having very many problems also with passengers, because, and I like this bill because it is also making a passenger responsible of their own safety and the safety of others by requiring them, Mr. Speaker, in section 13, requiring the responsibility of a passenger that one, they must wear a helmet and wear a reflective jacket. When driving at night, Mr. Speaker, or being driven, sometimes you realize there was just there is a motorcycle just when you are about to hit them, because they do not wear reflective jackets. Some of them, the rear lights are off and or not operational at all, and so visibility becomes very poor. And I also like the section that requires them, again, without mixing up matters, that requires them, the riders, to also have the headlight on all the time when they are using the roads, Mr. Speaker. So the fact that we are making the passengers responsible by requiring them to wear protective gear and not to board a motorcycle that has already been boarded by another customer, another passenger, Mr. Speaker, I think Senator Halwale had really observed what happens in his county and other counties, because this is a problem that cuts across all the counties of Kenya, Mr. Speaker, and we must make both the rider and the passenger responsible, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the safety of other road users. Something caught my eye under 17A, that the riders will not be allowed to carry a load whose width projects more than 15 centimeters beyond the the outside edge of the handlebars. Mr. Speaker, some of these riders have been ferrying loads that are very wide, occupying a whole lane sometimes. You do not know how to overtake them, and if you get to hit that particular load, Mr. Speaker, sometimes, of course, the vehicle will get a problem. Mr. Speaker, the rider will also get a problem. And so this is something that I thought should really be supported. Mr. Speaker, I also noted that under 17.2, we are trying to protect our roads under this bill. Because most of the border riders, especially those ferrying goods, Mr. Speaker, especially loads, like you can talk about building bars, Mr. Speaker. They drag them along the tarmac. And this makes our roads get destroyed, Mr. Speaker. And we know that, of course, road construction is a very expensive thing. And so that is something very, very, very important, so that we protect our roads and we also protect the riders. Because when they drag these particular load, it means that they are also not safe, because, of course, stability of the cycle, the motorcycle, that is a two-wheeled motorcycle, Mr. Speaker, then becomes greatly compromised by dragging this particular, by dragging loads along the road. I hope I got it right. You know where I come from, where you have a load and a road, you could get problems with R and L, Mr. Speaker, especially when you come from where I come from, and I know you also don't come from very, very far from there, Mr. Speaker. So that is also very important. Insurance cover under Section 22, Mr. Speaker. Most of the people that have had accidents, motorcycle accidents, sometimes suffering very great harm to their bodies, grievous harm, they have no recourse. They have to meet their medical bills. If you lose your leg, you just lose it. Nobody will compensate you, because most of these riders do not operate, do not actually have an insurance cover on their bikes. But, Mr. Speaker, as we require our border riders to have an insurance cover for every other motorcycle that is on the road, we must also consider the rates of buying of paying for a cover, Mr. Speaker, because the business is not that profitable. So what then should be done? Although we'll be bringing amendments to this bill, what then should be done, Mr. Speaker? I'm of the view that the government, because every government gives incentives to business people, that the government chips in. We can even actually have an insurance agency partly or wholly owned by the government, so that we can charge these border riders an amount or a figure that they can be able to afford, and whatever is over and above the value of the cover, then it is made by the government, Mr. Speaker, as an incentive to this particular sector that has employed so many of our youths, Mr. Speaker. So there are very many benefits in this bill, but we need also to rethink about the offenses and penalties. And we may not want to allow them to break the law, but I think we may need to revise some figures. If you go to 26.2, then there is a provision that if you are found liable to a particular offense, then you are, penalized 100,000 Kenya shillings, Mr. Speaker, which may not be affordable. So, Mr. Speaker, I think we may need to revise some of these figures downwards, even as we encourage our young men and women who are riding boda bodas to be law-abiding, Mr. Speaker, but we must charge them penalties that can be afforded. That is why if you walk in almost every police station in this country, you are going to find loads and loads of boda or pikis parked there because our young men and women are not able to meet the requirements in law that they need to make in order for their arrested or their psychos that have been held in police stations released. So I think we should revise that. But I am also very excited, before I conclude, Mr. Speaker, about the ganging. This bill has something under 2026 that they will not be allowed to gang, especially when there is an accident, because it has become a very serious problem, Mr. Speaker, and I'm concluding that when there is an accident between a motorcycle and a vehicle, whether or not the rider was the one on the wrong, then they gang up and harass motorists. Such are the things that actually should not be encouraged, and Mr. Speaker, I support this bill in totality with some amendments that members may bring. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for that particular opportunity.
Thank you. Next is Senator Mogeni Herrick Okong.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to begin by thanking the Senator of Kakamega for the interest he has shown in bringing a bill that addresses concerns of boda riders, who, Mr. Speaker, make a huge contribution to our economy. And we thank our former president, late Mzee Mwai Kibaki, who in 2008 zero-rated motorcycles, and that opened the market. I think we now have Senator Galwale, I believe more than 2 million motorcycles in this country. And there's no doubt that they are making a very huge contribution to our economy. Every time they fuel, Mr. Speaker, that is tax to the government. And there are many counties that also tax boda. So they are making a huge contribution to the bodas. I don't know about your county, Mr. Speaker, but I know where I come from, the county of Nyamira. I have so many people who have gone to school to a degree level. I have so many boda riders who have qualified as teachers. I even I've picked one or two and encouraged them to apply for teaching jobs, and they have been successful. So our sons who are in boda business, I need, because we have no jobs, so we also need to be very fair and kind to them. So as we pass this regulation, Mr. Speaker, my first concern is that we should not pass a law that will again put a heavy burden on the bodas. I've looked at the roads, Mr. Speaker. You sympathize with these young children of ours. They ride their motorcycles in dusty roads from morning to evening, Mr. Speaker. When it rains, they still want to continue doing their business because they have to fend for their families. At times, they are called in the wee hours of the night to pick passengers. They say yes because they are trying to fend for their families. So they work under very, very difficult conditions. And I wish the government can put in place mechanisms of upgrading our roads to bitumen standards, so that these very enterprising cadre of Kenyans can work in an environment that is, puts a human face to the business. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, I want to support this bill, but with a number of amendments. I want to persuade Senator Halwale to listen to my concerns on this bill. The first concern, Mr. Speaker, is that if we create this board in Section 5, the way it is, it has a heavy presence of county government. And it's huge, 11 members. Okay? You are saying the chairperson should be appointed by the county governor. Personally, I'll propose that we have a competitive process of picking a chair through the County Public Service Board. There is nothing so special that a governor should appoint a chairman. Let it be competitive. Let those who have an interest in that sector be allowed to apply in a competitive process to the County Public Service Board. In terms of representatives from the County Executive Committee membership, you have proposed we put a representative from, a CC member for transport, CC member finance, you have put there Attorney General, and then you go to F and again propose 4 persons appointed by the County Executive Committee member responsible for matters relating to transport. I'll persuade that we consider making a proposal to amend these 4F to have representative from the sub-counties. If in Kakamega you have 12, let each sub-county elect 1 person. And we have tried issues of elections. In the Judicial Service Commission, every representative is elected. The only ones who sit in JAC without being subjected to an election are those who are there by virtue of their offices. Chief Justice, Attorney General, and the likes. But the rest, even if it's Supreme Court, they elect their representative. Court of Appeal, they elect their representative. Magistrate, they elect their representative. So that we remove this thing of throwing everything to the county. This bill is like self-regulating. Law Society of Kenya does self-regulation, and it does it so well. If you misbehave, lawyers are able to strike you off the roll. And I think if you give power to the boda sector, they can ably regulate themselves. Secondly, having said that about the board, secondly, Mr. Speaker, is the issue of mitigating costs on licenses. Mr. Speaker, sir, some of these boda riders come from very poor families. Personally, I've helped a few to register and get a driving license because they come from very disadvantaged families. These are people from our counties. We know them. We know their families. I'd rather that we push this burden to the government. There's a time, Mr. Speaker, when CDF, and I'm privileged to have you on the chair because you have been a former member of parliament. There's a time CDF used to have a budget to assist bodas get their licenses. Let the government take that burden. Senator Alwale, every day a boda walks into a petrol station, they fuel 1 liter. The government takes 82 shillings as tax. So why can't the government also set aside a fund to train and pay for their licenses? That can be done through NTSA, because we should also appreciate the contribution that these boda riders are making to the economy, other than locking so many of them from the industry because they are not able to get these licenses. And you know, Mr. Speaker, remember, if you put so many offenses, you are creating an avenue for corruption through the police. If you engage these guys, some of them call us. They are riding, they get arrested, they are told if you don't have a helmet, the fine is 5,000. Policeman will tell you, toa 500. Why can't you make it easy? Because we want to eliminate corruption. Make the fine affordable. Charge this guy 500 shillings. So that money goes to the government as a fine. When you make it so high, the policeman will take the easier option. Give me 500, the fine is 5,000. Failure to display an insurance sticker, the penalty is 10,000. Tell me, Senator Kalwale, through you, Mr. Speaker, sir, there is no boda who will walk into a court of law and pay a fine of 10,000. So they will opt to give a bribe to the police. Let's make the penalties to be reasonable. If you are found drunk and riding a motorcycle, they will fine you 60,000. They can't afford it. So I'll propose that we ride on this bill and create fines that can be affordable. Let's also appreciate that the highest you can make as an owner of a motorcycle is between 500 to 1,000 shillings a day. So let's also have fines that are fairly reasonable. 3, Mr. Speaker, I've seen a lot of reforms on how we conduct elections. This idea of saying you come up with elections and you throw it to anybody, any Tom, Dick and Harry, to conduct elections for borders, is not working. I will be persuading the mover that I bring in an amendment to have the elections of the border industry be conducted by IEBC. 2 weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, you know that the tea elections directors were conducted by IEBC. I'm moving a motion here to also ask that elections for trade unions should be supervised by IEBC, so that we have people who have direct mandates from people in that sector. You allow, other people out there who are not accountable to conduct elections, you'll get manipulation. People will also come in to interfere, and you get leaders who maybe don't have the confidence of the membership. So let's use this opportunity to put in place a credible process of carrying out elections so that there can now be proper self-regulation. In the Law Society of Kenya, Senator Mungatana will tell you, our elections are conducted by IEBC. That's why you don't see lawyers going to court filing petitions, because it's credible, it enjoys the confidence of the membership. I'm looking forward to a day when my good friend, Secretary General of Kotu, Francis Atwoli, will also be elected in a process that is overseen by IEBC, so that the concept of, it is there in Chapter 6. If you are subject to an election, the Constitution says you should be elected in a transparent electoral process, but by secret ballot. That's what the Constitution says. We don't want those things of 88 of lining up. Then the issue of SACCOs. SACCOs are good, but we need a mechanism where maybe counties, we give counties a lot of money. This money is eaten. Let's make an obligation here that counties will give seed money to our SACCOs. Governors get a lot of money. A lot of it goes to mandazi and kunywa chai. Put some austerity measures. We say each county will put aside some seed money to jumpstart counties. SACCOs. Why did we create counties if they cannot benefit our people? Traffic policemen. In a roadblock near my home in Metamayo, Mr. Speaker, a police officer threw spikes on a boda cyclist. This guy hit the spikes at high speed, rolled, he died. He died. We now have motorcycles with registered number plates, Mr. Speaker. A traffic offense is not a life and death issue. If this guy is committing a traffic offense, failing to stop, Mr. Speaker, you don't throw a spike and cause a life. The way PLO says, don't respond to a mosquito bite with a hammer, Mr. Speaker. The best you should do is take the registration number. These motorcycles are registered, and there is now a proposal here to ensure that all of them are registered in a SACCO. Just take the registration number, go after the guy. But causing a life, Mr. Speaker, by throwing a spike, I don't think that is right. We are being extremely inhuman as a country. As I get towards conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I've looked at the number of offences that have been created in this act. I am of the view that there are too many. The offences are too many. And the fine, Mr. Speaker, you can't fine a boda 100,000 shillings. That is a fine that should be meted out to an honourable member of parliament. It's 10% of their salary. But putting it at 100,000, Mr. Speaker, is too much. Let us have a reasonable fine. You know, at times you can go to London and you find that committing an offence is £1,000. But when you look at the income of the victim or the culprit, he's earning over 10,000. It's called what? Great British Pound. When you convert, that's over $1 million. That is reasonable, saying they pay 100,000. But now for this economy, a boda guy who is making 800 shillings a day or 500, and then you tell him if you commit an offense here, you pay a fine of 100,000. That's unaffordable. And that's how we create avenues for policemen to collect